The water closes over my head and I am sucked down, holding my mother's words and memories close to me. The weight of them pulls me deeper, my hair unbraiding and floating upwards towards the rippling light. Down and down, Mum bending over me in our house, the firelight making her smile and frown over and over again. Down and down, Mum holding Net to her breast. He was waxy and blue and Mum was still bloody and sweating, but she thanked the gods and Net curled his tiny fingers like he had a good strong grip on life, and he was the best thing I had ever seen. The water presses into me, squeezes me. Mum puts the food on the warm stone for me and Net and for Daisy, who spreads it across her grinning little face, and we all laugh. Salt in my mouth, dark green shapes flit around me. Something like weed wraps around my arms and my legs. I am being pulled into the cold, lost in the deep black that I imagined when I found that good scraper stone so long ago. No breath left. No breath. I slowly dissolve and come apart. I am the sea. The Sky Machine by Martin Lidderment, performed by Phoebe Lawrence. Season 2, Chapter 9. The Boats of the Gods. Roll call, said Yarrow. Too right. We needed to take our numbers. We had got out of the valley somehow, without dying, and had reached the top of the next ridge. Then the ones who ran away had come back sheepishly, holding out their hands for forgiveness. Had we lost anyone? It didn't seem so after Yarrow did the counting, and we had looked round at each other, checking all the faces. Behind us, the shape of the thing the spiders were spinning went up and up into the sky like a tree without branches. At its top, there was a vast overturned bowl, and spilling out of the bowl were mists and more flashes of blue lightning. The remains of Auntie Prim's village disappeared into the fogs as they rolled over the land and filled her valley to the brim. Yarrow told us to look away. The evil would enter our eyes, she said. It would burn in our heads and we would forget what we had to do. We must press on. The sea was still our goal. I thought, the world is ending. The new gods are too strong. Yarrow should have made her peace with them and not hung on to the ways of the old gods. What can the stag do against things that eat the earth? Was that despair, Mum? You taught me never to despair, because when we give up, we surely die. But we went on, like Yarrow said. After 2 more days travelling, we could see the difference in the way the earth and the sky looked. They joined up with an edge, a seam of brightness, and I knew that meant the sea was there. I told the people that, and they jogged along, faster now the end was in sight. Just the snakes to deal with, said Yarrow under her breath. I had been trying not to think about them. The snakes were the boat people. When you needed to sail off the edge of the world and go to the other place, they were the ones you paid for their skill. Their boats were hides, stretched over wood. I mean, anyone could see that. But how they made the hides tight, and how they stopped the water coming in, well, that was a secret that only the snakes knew, and they weren't telling. You paid them in flint, because there wasn't any in that part of the world. Careful to whisper, I asked Yarrow if we had enough to trade. What with the attack in the mountains, and what we had dropped or lost on the way, I reckoned we were short by at least 3 basketfuls. She said she thought I was right, but that we might be able to do something. I had no idea what she might have in mind. The snakes are a weird lot. They eat fish. Really, truly they do. And things like crabs and oysters. They're either blessed or cursed. No one knows which. If you can fly on top of the water and jump into it to get your food, then you must have very powerful protection. Just think of all those lives streaming past you on their way to the other place. You're wading in them, swimming in them even. The snakes have very strange gods. Yarrow told me about them once. There's the sleeping eel. That one doesn't do much. He simply wallows about in the sea and drifts along with his huge mouth open wide, swallowing up the souls in the water. He spits out most of them, but sometimes he crunches down on a particularly juicy one. That frightened me. There are others as well, and Yarrow described one horrible. Well, I know that one isn't made up because I have seen the tribe mark of the snakes on blocks of salt that come into our village. It's a thing with long wavy arms and big eyes. Hideous. Like something out of a bad dream. We came to the edge of the world and stood for a while, looking down at the waters rushing and roaring at the foot of the cliffs. The wind was up, and the tops of the waves were being lashed into spray. I licked my lips and tasted salt. Daisy watched me and did the same, then laughed. We walked on for another half day, always keeping the world's edge to our left until we came to the great notch in the ground and the path that led down to the snake's village. The pole at the top was hung with 3 tokens: a bear's skull, a wolf's paw, and an eagle's wing. So those tribes had been before us. The tokens looked ragged and salt-encrusted. We were late on the journey now. We added our otter skin to the pole and started down. The wind howled and hissed in the tough grasses and we all shivered. At the bottom it was easier. We were in the shadow of the cliffs and the snakes were there with a big fire burning. Their scouts had seen us and they were ready. Yarrow stepped forward to do the trade and the snake leader met her. The snake was young, like Yarrow, and looked like she was made of the same stuff as the cliff and the biting wind. She scowled when she saw how little flint we had to offer, and I felt my hopes tumble down into the dirt. The trade wasn't going well. The snake kept shaking her head and pointing to where the boats had been drawn up onto the gravel at the sea edge. Of course, it wasn't just a case of us taking the boats. A couple of snakes had to go with each one, to paddle and to steer. But there seemed to be something else going on that was making the bargaining even more difficult than I had thought. Yarrow came back to us where we were sitting down, huddled under blankets to try and stay warm. The big fire behind her looked very comforting, and I hoped that she had got to an agreement. "Well," she said, slowly, "here's what it is. The snake says the sea is angry because we have not brought enough flint. It's offended. We have to give something more." I looked past Yarrow to the snake, who was standing with her feet planted well apart, her arms folded. The snake men were glaring at us as well, and there were at least 3 times as many of them as there were of us. They were beating the butts of their spears slowly on the gravel and shifting their weight from side to side in a way I didn't like. Our men were scowling back at them. Suddenly, my mouth felt dry. "But we haven't got any more flint," I said. "What else would they want?" Yarrow knelt down in front of me and put her hands on mine. She didn't speak for a while, and she wasn't really looking at me anyway. Her eyes were seeing something else, far away. Finally, she said, "Gilly, you know how important the journey is to each of us, and what it means to the tribe and to the life of the people." I nodded, trying to see what lay behind her words. Then her eyes were watching me properly, watching me so intently. Her hands moved up my arms and gripped harder still. She said, "There are moments when we have to be strong. You know that? Like we had to be when we made our choices at the fingers. The right thing to do is not always the easy thing." "Yarrow," I said, "why are you talking like this? You're frightening me." She said nothing in answer. Instead, she suddenly pushed me backwards, calling out as she did so. I was fighting her, Mum. I fought so hard. I even tried to scratch and bite, but more hands were on me, then holding me down, pinning me to the wet sand. I knew what we would have to give to appease a god, and I screamed Daisy's name, but it was too late. The snake leader ran forwards and scooped Daisy off her feet and carried her towards the fire. I could see Daisy's mouth wide open, but I couldn't hear her for the wind and the shouting of the snakes and the cries of our people. Yarrow was shouting too, and the snake men had turned their spears outwards towards us, making a ring around the fire. I was wild with anger and fear, and I kept struggling so hard that the women and men who were holding me could hardly keep me down. The snakes were chanting and dancing round their fire. My people were wailing and singing the sacrifice song, and everything was a mass of sound and movement and confusion. Then, in a moment, a single breath, everything changed. Someone took a flying leap straight into the men who were pinning me to the ground. One was pushed away and fell with a cry. Whoever it was hit out left and right with a spear and kicked a man who doubled over in pain. I felt a strong hand round my wrist and I was yanked to my feet. "To the boats, Gilly," said Ned. Daisy ran up behind him. The snake that had been carrying her was on the sand, bleeding. My little brother, the man. His eyes were as fierce as the sea and the fire. We all ran down the shore together. The snakes had been busy with their singing and with my people, but they had left their boats unguarded, so we simply pushed the nearest one into the sea. It was very light, much lighter than I had expected. Either that or something gave me extra strength. I jumped in with Daisy and Ned pulled himself in after me. We had been spotted by then, of course. The snakes came howling after us and they were going to catch us. It was hopeless. Ned was trying to paddle, but the waves were pushing us back towards land. And Yarrow, she just stepped from nowhere. Yarrow did, Mum. And she looked over her shoulder at me once, then turned back to the snakes and raised her hands up to the sky and she sang. I could hear her voice above the wind and the crashing of the sea. And then a spear went right through her. We made the boat dance over the water and we were carried along by something big and strong under the waves as well, it seemed. We didn't look back, but for every breath I took, every stroke of the paddle, I thought a spear was piercing me as well, through my heart. I wondered why it kept beating. We continued out into the wild sea where we were definitely going to drown, but at least we will be together when it happens, I thought. My strength was nearly exhausted and Ned was tiring too, when Daisy looked back and said, "They've gone." I turned round and she was right. The snakes had not pursued us in their boats and their fire was just a bright dot. The waves hit it every time they surged up. It's strange, Mum, how you don't think about things that are complicated when you are doing them. Like walking. No one remembers their first steps. But when we watch babies take them, we can see how much effort it takes to balance and shift one leg forwards and then the next. All that tottering and arm waving. So we learn. And then we forget about learning. And we don't think about all the things we have to do when we walk. How to lift a foot, how to set it down, how to keep falling forwards without actually falling until the other foot goes past the first, and that's another step done out of all the ones you will take in your whole life. Or like paddling a boat on the Great Sea. Now we had almost stopped. I realised I had no idea what we had been doing to keep the boat upright. The waves and the wind had become the biggest things in the world and seemed to want to turn us sideways. I wondered how we had managed to get this far, and as the boat rolled and the water came over the edge and filled the bottom round our feet, I clutched at Ned. Daisy did too. We dropped the paddles and held each other. And that moment was our undoing, Mum. One last big wave. One great gust of cold wind and we were over. We plunged into the water and down we all went. It was dark and cold and peaceful. My ears sang and bubbles went up around me. I slowly dissolved and drifted apart. I thought, will I stay as a useful thing in the memory of my people? Will something of me remain, like my stone scraper? I tried to think about Yarrow and how her hair looked and what her touch was like, but my mind didn't seem to want to stay on that track and kept going back to the sway and the surge of the waters. That was good. Nothing hurt in the slow, all-embracing deep. All the pain was being washed away. Then, just as the last bits of me were melting into the sea, great lights came from all around, and something stronger than the strongest arms and hands that were gentle and powerful took me and lifted me up and up until I was in the great swirl of the sky. Who knew that sleep lived in the clouds, or that it could be so peaceful and so deep? It didn't last long. Coming awake was not so easy. There was harsh brightness all around and pain in my wrists and my ankles and something firm and unyielding under my back. The sky seemed illuminated by the sun, but the sun was somewhere beneath me and I was rushing along inside the sky. Or maybe I was lying still and the sky was rolling past like a huge river. The cold river, always flowing, never stopping. The pain faded away, and I felt peaceful again. I turned my head and saw Net and Daisy lying beside me, their eyes open, staring up. They shimmered and glittered, but that was something that had been wrapped around them. A blanket of stars, it seemed. I couldn't lift my head, but I looked down past the end of my nose and saw that I had been covered with the same stuff. It was very light. I could barely feel it on my skin. And we were all looped with strands of green and red, running in and out of our arms and our legs. I could see where the strands went into my flesh, and it looked like it should hurt a lot, but it didn't. "What is this?" I asked aloud. I was questioning myself, but I got an answer. From behind me, a long, pale hand reached down to stroke my forehead. It was a hand I recognised, and the voice that went with the hand said, "You are on the boats of the gods, Gilly." I must have been drifting away again at that moment, or I wouldn't have dared to speak. But I heard myself saying, "Which gods? The old ones or the new?" "The gods that you can touch, Gilly," said Server Ash. "They're the only ones you need to worry about now." The Sky Machine is written by Martin Liddeman and performed by Phoebe Lawrence. Music by Purple Planet Music, Daniel Birch and the Pangolins. Special thanks to Stratford Youth Theatre, which provides high-quality drama workshops for children and young people in and around Stratford-upon-Avon. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can listen to the first season at skymachine.podbean.com or search for Sky Machine on any of the major podcast platforms.